Hey everyone, so in today's video I wanted to break down 3 of the glitter top coats that I often see people comparing, and I wanted this video to really be helpful so you could see, really depending on your preferences, which of these glitter top coats is going to work the best for you. All 3 of these formulas are so different that I really do think they suit different people and different needs. I also do have a secret drugstore option later in this video, and we'll first start off with the most pigmented of all of these 3, the Seequins Glitter Glam eyeshadows from Marc Jacobs. These retail for $28 and you get 0.15 ounces in here. Essentially what these are pressed glitter top coats to really add a lot of dimension to the eye. I love using a product like this for a one shadow look, and that's typically what I use these for, but really they're supposed to transform any look. Marc Jacobs says that it's a demi-pressed eyeshadow. It is not as tightly packed as a typical glitter shadow, and because of that it's going to give you a ton of pigment. There are quite a few shades. I have the shade Pop Rocks as well as Topaz Flash. These are really interesting because there's a really strong base pigment to these, and then there's a ton of glitter throughout. So out of all of the shadows that I'm talking about today, these have the most base pigment as well as the most glitter. These aren't pressed super tightly, which gives them a lot of pigment, a lot of glitter payoff. These to me are the least wearable for like an everyday situation. There is a ton of pigment obviously coming off of them. They're definitely the chunkiest out of all of the ones that I'm talking about. But something really beautiful happens when you kind of buff them onto the eye. And I don't necessarily mean it's the best idea to really swirl a brush around and put it on the lid. Because of the intense glitter throughout this, when you really pack it on the lid and get the product moving, the light really reflects very prettily on top of the lid, and it will give you not necessarily a really wet look to the lids, but a very, very glittery and sparkly look. Typically the glitter throughout these kind of have a shift to them, which I think is really pretty. They tend to reflect multiple colors. My personal favorite is Topaz Flash. Because these have so much pigment and so much glitter, I do think that because there is such a heavy base pigment, these wear really nicely. They make really great like one and done smoky eyes in my opinion. They don't necessarily feel crumbly, but you can tell that they are kind of like a pigment glitter hybrid. They're a lot looser and feel a little bit chunkier in the fingers. But again, once you kind of buff them onto the lid and really press them down and glide them across the lid, they do adhere very easily. And I don't find that I get any fallout with any of these. I don't find that I get a lot of fallout with these throughout the night, or that they really crease or kind of gravitate to other areas on my eyelids once I've applied them. But with a chunkier glitter, I always do find that they don't wear as nicely as something a little bit on the more natural side. I will say though that I think that this formula is really nice for more impactful looks. I don't think I would necessarily reach for them for every day, but if you're looking for a super impactful top coat that is going to bring a lot of base pigment, a lot of sparkle, and is going to last on the lids, I definitely think that these are an awesome option. Let's next move on to the Hourglass Scattered Light Eyeshadows. I have 2 shades. I have the shade Reflect as well as the shade Smoke. I'm actually wearing Smoke on my lids today, and I just adore this color. These retail for $29 and you get the same amount of product. You get 0.15 ounces. I feel like these 2, the Sequins from Marc Jacobs and the Scattered Light Shadows from Hourglass, are the most similar. I do find that the Hourglass shade range is slightly more wearable than the Marc Jacobs Sequins. They do have some more everyday shades, whereas I feel like Marc Jacobs went a little bit more of the bold route with their top coats, which I do think suit the finish that it gives you, if that kind of makes sense. Whereas Hourglass, I do think that the finish of these much more suit the shades that they chose. These don't have a really strong base pigment the way that the Marc Jacobs Sequins does. That has a base pigment and then a ton of glitter that kind of gives you a really foiled effect on the lids. Whereas I really feel like the Hourglass has a more creamy texture to it. It's definitely a more emollient glitter top coat, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a straight cream. It really balances a pressed glitter shadow and a cream shadow in one. I really do like the formula for that reason. It's more of a medium pigmentation, and it manages to give you a really pretty sparkly effect to the lid. There definitely is a base pigment to it, but it isn't like with the Marc Jacobs where it really feels like there's a super strong base pigment and a ton of glitter. These to me are like a toned down version of that. I love that you can apply these straight with a finger and get a one shadow look very easily. I really enjoy the look that these give my lids. Again, it gives you a very sparkly look. It also has that slight glossy wet look to it, which I always love and I think is really flattering on the lids. Just to quickly talk about the packaging on these, because I do notice a big difference between the Hourglass and the Marc Jacobs. The Marc Jacobs come in these glass pots, whereas the Hourglass come in these little plastic pots, which feel very cheap, and it is kind of disappointing, especially when you compare them. You know, you get the same amount of product with each, but the Marc Jacobs feels way more luxe. Back to the way that these apply, the way that I like to apply them. With all of these, I like to apply them with a finger. I think I get the best blend that way. I love the way that they so easily glide onto the lids. The glitter on here is so refined. These definitely feel to me like a more refined version of a glitter top coat. The formula never leaves any sparkles on the face, and I never use a primer with these. You really don't need one. And I actually find that even though these don't have a lot of base pigment to them, they don't crease a lot. I actually find these to be slightly more long wearing than the Marc Jacobs Seequins. Overall, I think that the Hourglass Scattered Light Shadows, in my opinion, I prefer them a little bit more to the Marc Jacobs Seequins just because they're a little bit easier for every day. Also, the glitter in here just kind of reads as a sparkle and a sheen, whereas with the Marc Jacobs Seequins, it truly is like glitter. Now moving on to the Natasha De Nonna Chroma Crystal top coats. So I have two shades. I have the shade Gray Brown as well as the shade Peach. This immediately gives you a really, really wet look to your lids without using a gloss or using a cream shadow. But that's kind of the thing. Is it a cream shadow? Is it a pressed pigment? Glitter pigment cream hybrid, whereas with this, it truly does have a wet feeling once you press your finger into the product. It definitely has more emollients than the other products do. This is definitely more heavily pressed down than the other two products that I've talked about today. It also has the most emollients to it, so the formula to me is really interesting. These have the least amount of pigment as well versus the other two that I was talking about earlier. It has a really nice wash of color and base pigment that's more on the light side, but the glitter within here and the formula, because it does have that sheerness to it and also the glitter throughout it, leaves such an effortless, glossy effect to the lids. It really is the perfect one-stop shop, one single shadow to really give a beautiful, refined, glossy lid effect without going into a gloss. The shades are also really, really well thought out. The gray brown shade leaves you with a very soft, taupey, glossy look on the lids, and the peach shade is also super wearable for every day if you want to give your lids a little bit of life. I think the other two look a little bit more like actual glitter top coats. I think the Marc Jacobs is the most intense, whereas the Hourglass is a little bit less intense, and these truly don't necessarily read as super glittery top coats because they are the least pigmented in the base. As well as the glitter, there is a lot less glitter in these than the other two. Though I do really, really enjoy the formula of the Natasha De Nonna top coats. They definitely wear a lot less time than the other two do, which is a little bit disappointing. But if I'm being honest, with a product like this, it's really difficult to find a product that gives you a super, super wet effect to your lids that is also long wearing. There are definitely some pressed pigments out there that will give you a similar effect, but this one really does have the emollients that I think a lot of you will enjoy. Let's quickly break down what I would typically use each of these shadows for and why I would gravitate to them. Starting off with the Natasha De Nonna Top Coat. If I'm looking for a super natural glossy lid effect without going for a gloss, I think that this is a really great option. If I was to go to a party and I wanted like a super bold glittery effect on my lids, I would go with the Marc Jacobs Seequins. They're definitely the most impactful, which I personally, for my style and makeup, I don't necessarily gravitate towards. I can appreciate them, and I think for those of you that really like bold looks would like them. The Hourglass to me kind of sits somewhere in between. I think that's what makes them, personally, I think the most versatile out of all of these products. I honestly appreciate all three of these for different reasons, but if I'm just going off of which formula I think is the most unique, I think the Natasha De Nonna is definitely the most unique. For the one that I would see myself reaching for the most, I think it's the Hourglass Scattered Light. Now, I'm not sure if you guys saw this coming, but I did want to give you a little bit of a drugstore option, a product that a lot of you I know already love, and they are the Colourpop Super Shock Shadows. These can give you a very similar effect to some of the products that I've already talked about. For example, the shade Sailor in particular reminds me a lot of the Natasha De Nonna Chroma Crystal Top Coat. The base pigment throughout it is so sheer, but it has the really refined shimmer that ends up giving your lids a really, really glossy effect. If you'd like a dupe, if you want to go with a little bit more of an affordable option, I would definitely go with this, and it will last longer than the Natasha De Nonna. It does have a little bit more of the creaminess that you're looking for to give yourself that more glossy effect on the lids. It's not as wet looking as the Natasha De Nonna, but it's very, very close. If you're looking for something closer to the Hourglass Scattered Light or the Marc Jacobs Seequins, I have two other shades. I have the shade Cosmic Charge, which is drop dead gorgeous. I love this shade so much. It reminds me a lot of the Hourglass Scattered Light Shadows. It doesn't wear like quite as long as the Hourglass. To be honest, I don't notice a huge difference in the way it wears. I can just tell that it's creasing just like a little bit more, but it gives you such a similar effect to your lids. And there are some really, really gorgeous shades to pick throughout all of these, but not all of them have the same finish. So for example, Cosmic Charge is an ultra glitter, and this glitter to me is as close as I found to something like the Hourglass Scattered Light or the Marc Jacobs Seequins. I also really, really like a little Quarky. This one to me reminds me a lot of Reflect from Hourglass or the Natasha De Nonna Peach shade. It's kind of a mix between the two. I think it kind of goes to show you that if you're looking for a sparkly top coat, you know, at a more affordable price, Colourpop does a really, really nice one that I think a lot of you will really enjoy. Remember that I'm going to be coming out with my best of cream eyeshadow. Remember that I will be coming out with my best of cream eyeshadow video very, very soon on my channel. It's to kind of round off 1 week of cream eyeshadow here on my channel. I'm so glad that you guys have been enjoying these videos. I've worked really hard on them and just can't thank you enough for all of your support. Give this video a thumbs up if you have enjoyed it. Leave me any questions that you guys have down below. I'm always happy to help, and I will see you in my next one.